Macedon was not yet a kingdom of legends. It was fractured, exposed, its people scattered across hills and river valleys like the bones of forgotten ancestors. And on its northern flank, the Illyrians gathered like wolves beneath a pale moon. The rain had stopped before dawn, but the clouds hung low and heavy, as if even the sky hesitated to watch what came next. The Macedonian army stood in a marshy hollow near the Aragon River, spears slick with dew, nerves thinner than the mist rising from the ground. At its center rode King Perdiccas III, young, bold, and too untested to know how near death truly was. He wore bronze polished to a gleam, but his horse twitched beneath him, and his right hand trembled slightly as he raised it. Across the field, the Illyrians beat their swords on round wooden shields, letting loose cries that echoed like thunder. Painted faces, bare skins, ragged banners stiff in the wind. They did not wait for diplomacy. Perdiccas tried to rally his front line with noble words. "Macedon stands," he called out. "We fight for our homes, for our blood." But his voice was swallowed by the roar of the Illyrian charge. The line collapsed before the first man fell. The phalanx was too thin, its men too green. Their spears cracked under pressure, their shields turned in panic. Illyrian axes crashed down with the certainty of law, and Macedonian cries became silence. The left flank buckled, and within moments, the Illyrians flooded the center like black water. Perdiccas drew his sword. He tried to regroup, shouting orders, wheeling his mount to stem the chaos. But his commanders were already down, slain or fleeing. A riderless horse galloped past him, red reins trailing like veins. Then he saw it. Too late. A tall Illyrian with braided hair and fire in his eyes broke through the melee. He leapt onto Perdiccas' horse, dragged the king from the saddle, and brought down an iron blade. The king's body struck the mud. His blood sank into the soil. It was over before midday. No messengers returned. No reinforcements came. The survivors crawled into the hills like ghosts. Macedon, leaderless, bloodied, humiliated, had fallen in a single day. And in the capital of Pella, when the news arrived, the palace fell into stunned quiet. The queen did not weep. The child heir was too young to understand the weight of the crown now passed to him. The throne room stood empty for the first time in a generation. And in the south, far from this ruin, a man in exile looked eastward and knew it was time to return. In the heart of Thebes, where olive groves met marble temples, a man trained in silence. He was not yet old, though his years had been sharpened by exile. His gaze was steady, precise, the gaze of a man who had studied power from its shadows. He watched the sparring yard before him, where boys fought for breath and footing. Philip had been hostage here since his boyhood, a pawn sent by Macedon to keep peace with the great city of Thebes. But peace was rarely honest, and Thebes was not a school. It was a forge. He had watched the sacred band drill in perfect unison, seen Epaminondas lecture on flanking tactics, listened as Pamenes debated the soul of democracy. He had learned how cities rose and how they fell. He was not forgotten in Thebes, nor was he beloved. When word came, it came not as rumor, but as an omen. A messenger, sweat-streaked and dust-covered, dismounted before the gate of the military compound and asked for the Macedonian. Philip read the letter in silence. His jaw clenched. His fingers curled the parchment until the edges tore. His brother, King Perdiccas, was dead, slain by Illyrians. The army scattered, the throne unguarded. His infant nephew, barely speaking, now wore a crown too heavy for his neck. Philip stood still, then handed the message back. "I need a horse," he said. He left Thebes the next morning, not as a hostage freed, but as a wolf released. The ride north was long, and Philip traveled without herald or fanfare. The sun burned low over Thessaly as he crossed its high plains. Herds scattered at the thunder of hooves. He did not stop to rest. He did not stop to mourn. When he reached Pella, the gates opened for him not out of duty, but out of fear. The palace, once the beating heart of the kingdom, now echoed with silence and suspicion. Ministers bickered over protocol. Generals whispered in corners. The child king's guardians moved like men under siege. Philip walked between them, his presence a blade drawn quietly. He entered the royal hall not as a claimant, but as a reckoning. Some rose in greeting, others froze. The regent, gray-bearded and unsure, stepped forward. "My Lord Philip, we feared you lost." Philip's gaze was cold. "You feared I'd return." He turned toward the throne, vacant, draped in dark cloth, and placed his hand on its armrest. "I will not let this kingdom fall into pieces, not while I draw breath." The room stiffened. The noblemen, unused to such certainty, looked to one another for a champion. None stood. Then one voice broke the silence. A young officer, barely older than a page, spoke from the rear. "You are no king." Philip stepped forward. No anger, no shout, just truth. Number. "But I am the only man here who has ever commanded men in battle, the only one who has bled for this land. And if any among you thinks himself better fit to lead, step forward now." No one moved. Philip let the silence linger until it stung. Then he said with calm conviction, "Swear your loyalty to me, and you may yet serve in a living kingdom. Refuse, and you'll serve in its grave." Slowly, heads bowed. One by one, they bent the knee. The boy king was quietly removed. No cries, no resistance. Only a quiet shuffle as history changed its course. And so, without coronation, without election, without anointing, Philip became King of Macedon. Not by law, not by birth, but by force of will. Power claimed in crisis is not yet power secured, and thrones taken in silence must be reinforced in steel. Philip did not celebrate his rise. There was no feast, no trumpet, no golden cloak draped over his shoulders. He wore the same armor he had arrived in, battered and unclean, and he ate that night with soldiers, not courtiers. Before the sun rose again over Pella, he was walking the length of the military encampment, what remained of it. The sight was pitiful. Boys, not men, old blades, cracked shields, leather armor stitched and restitched beyond use. These were not soldiers. They were the last breath of a kingdom. But Philip did not sneer. He looked, measured, calculated, and then he began to rebuild. He summoned blacksmiths and carpenters, ordered wood from the coastal forests, iron from the mountains, and sent messengers west, east, and south, seeking tools, horses, mercenaries, and knowledge. He burned the old muster rolls. Tradition had failed. Loyalty would be re-earned, not inherited. He formed them into cohorts, drilled them in pairs, then in columns, then in walls. At first, they stumbled, they cursed him, collapsed under heat and fatigue. But Philip was always there, riding among them, walking their ranks. He did not strike men who faltered. He made them ashamed of faltering. He replaced the short kopis blade with the sarissa, an 18-foot spear, unwieldy for any man to bear alone, but not in formation. He lined them up 6 deep, 8 deep, 10. "Hold," he would call, circling them like a sculptor circling his marble. Again, together. Strike as one or die as many. The phalanx was born not in battle, but in sweat and silence. And those who watched from the walls began to understand. This was not a king who ruled by blood. He ruled by force of creation. Among the officers stood a man with a measured stance and eyes that missed little. Parmenion. Not loud, not flashy, but steady in a way that settled those around him. He spoke rarely, but when he did, men listened. He valued structure over pride and kept his focus on the line, not the glory. When Philip reformed the ranks, Parmenion reformed with him, without complaint, without flattery, but with purpose. And from the women's quarters, a figure veiled in white listened to every footfall from the yard below. Olympias. Born Myrtale, daughter of Neoptolemus of Epirus, descendant, she claimed, of Achilles himself. She had grown up among wolves and priestesses, where kings were measured by their omens, not their gold. The marriage to Philip had been no love story. It was an alliance, forged as part of a treaty between Epirus and Macedon to steady the western frontier. She had arrived in Pella weeks after Philip's return from Thebes, silent, observant, unafraid. The court expected a rustic foreigner, a barbarian bride. What arrived was something else entirely. She did not smile easily. She did not flatter. She moved like a shadow among oil lamps. And when she spoke, servants stilled to hear her. She was younger than Philip by nearly 10 years, but she carried herself like a priestess before the altar, untouchable, unshaken. And she watched him, not with affection, but with calculation. This man who had seized a broken kingdom with neither an army nor a crown. This man who turned shepherds into soldiers, who taught boys to kill as one. She had known men like him in vision, not in flesh. He intrigued her, not because he was a conqueror, but because he believed. Olympias had not been raised to follow. She had been raised to shape the world by force or by fire. She had lain beside him in duty, but she had chosen to carry his child by will. Because in Philip she saw something worth forging into legacy, not a husband, a vessel. The old gods whispered that power did not pass through lineage alone, but through intent, through fire, through sacrifice. And she, Olympias, intended her child to be more than heir. She intended him to be divine. At night, Philip sat alone in his war chamber. A map lay before him, creased and wine-stained, its edges curling. Macedon in the center, Thrace to the east, Thessaly to the south, Illyria to the west. His finger traced the borders slowly, then paused over a tiny symbol etched in red ink, a sword crossed with a laurel, the place where his brother had died. He stared at it a long while, then said aloud to no one, "We are not finished." The sky had turned the color of hammered bronze, still, unmoving, as if the heavens themselves held their breath. The Illyrians came as they always did, loud, unclean, and sure of their victory. Their war drums beat through the northern valleys like the footfalls of giants. Their scouts carried severed heads as warnings, and behind them, the chieftains rode, cloaked in furs, their axes black with age and use. But this time, Macedon was waiting. On a plateau near the edge of Lake Lychnidus, Philip had made his stand, not by accident, but by design. He had studied the land, chosen the choke point, ordered the trenches dug and the brush burned. His men had camped in silence, no feasting, no singing, only sharpening of blades and practice drills till their hands bled. And now they stood, 5,000 men, shoulder to shoulder, 10 ranks deep, sarissas upright like a forest of iron. Philip rode the front slowly, his horse a step behind his thoughts. He did not shout, he did not gesture, he only looked. These were no longer farmers and herders. They were soldiers now, not yet veterans, not yet legend, but close. He stopped beside the youngest line, boys no older than 16, some still growing into their armor, their eyes wide, their mouths dry. He said quietly, "The first time you face death, It will call your name softly." Then he turned to the field. "They will come as gods, and you must greet them as walls." A wind rose, dry and cold. Parmenion approached, helm under his arm. "They outnumber us 2-1, he said. Philip gave a faint smile. "Good, fewer to bury after." He nodded once. A trumpet blew, not in triumph, but in warning. Far below, the Illyrians began to advance. Drums thundered, shields beat in rhythm. Painted bodies swarmed over the ridge like a plague of flesh. But Macedon did not move. Each man held the base of his spear, each boot dug into earth, each mind bound to the man beside him. This was not a mob. This was a phalanx. Philip did not retreat to the rear. He remained forward, behind the second line. He had given one order above all others: hold. No cries, no charges. Hold. And when the Illyrians came within 100 paces, the sound changed. The drums fell silent. The war cries stopped. Only the wind spoke. Philip raised his hand, paused, then dropped it. 10,000 spears lowered as one. 10,000 hearts beat as one. The wall moved forward, not fast, not wild, not brave, but inevitable. The charge broke against them like a wave against cliffs. Illyrian warriors screamed as they collided with the phalanx, but the Macedonian line held. The sarissas thrust forward, swallowing men by the dozens. Screams of shock, then of agony, echoed into the hills. The phalanx moved as one, a slow, brutal tide. Each step forward crushed fear underfoot. Each spear a sentence. Behind the wall, Philip rode like a specter, calm, deliberate, unyielding. His cloak flared behind him, torn at the edge, stained by rain and dust. He did not lift his sword. He did not need to. The men had become the weapon. Further down the field, Parmenion led the left wing. A glancing blow struck his helm, and blood ran into his beard, but he did not falter. He shouted for his men to press. "Do not stop! Do not pity them! We bury them here!" And they did. A scream rose above the battlefield, not of war, of birth. Far to the south, in a shadowed room deep within Pella's inner quarters, Olympias gripped the edge of her bed as the pain came again. Like a wave, like a blade inside her body. Sweat glistened on her brow. Candles flickered, their flames straining against the draft of the storm. The midwife knelt, hands ready but trembling. No physicians, no priests. Only firelight, breath, and prayer. Olympias had sent all others away. She had lit incense to Dionysus. She had poured wine to Zeus Ammon. She had whispered secrets to the serpent coiled at her wrist. "This child is not of Philip," she breathed. "He is of Olympus." The pain doubled. She clenched her teeth. Outside, thunder rolled. Across the Aegean, in the holy city of Ephesus, another storm burned. A man stumbled from the temple steps, arms raised in panic. Behind him, the white marble pillars of Artemis, goddess of birth and hunt, were crowned in flame. The temple, pride of Ionia, was burning. No one knew how it had begun. Some blamed a madman. Others swore they saw a great eagle pass overhead before the fire took. A priestess stood barefoot in the square, ash in her hair, eyes wide. "She is not here," she said, her voice rising into a cry. "Artemis is not with us. She is at a birth greater than this stone." In Pella, Olympias screamed once more. The child came, slippery with blood, fists clenched, mouth silent. For a heartbeat, no sound. Then a cry, piercing, sharp, like a blade pulled from fire. The midwife wept. Olympias did not. She looked at the boy and nodded, as if she had known his face long before it formed. "Alexander," she whispered, "you were promised." Outside, lightning split the sky above the palace. Inside, the child cried again, and the earth seemed to answer. Morning broke slowly across the ridges of northern Macedon. Pale light crept over fields soaked with blood. Crows circled in the distance, but not over Macedonian dead. The battlefield was quiet now. Only the soft rhythm of cleanup remained. Soldiers dragging the wounded, retrieving broken spears, stacking the fallen Illyrians in mounds for burial or burning. Philip stood apart on a rise of stone and scrub. His helmet rested in the crook of his arm. His face was unreadable, not joy, not grief, only thought. Behind him, Parmenion approached with a limp. Blood crusted his shoulder. His voice was low. "They're finished, scattered. What's left will flee west by nightfall." Philip nodded, still gazing toward the sunrise. "I don't care where they run," he said, "so long as they remember where they broke." A boy approached, a runner, barely more than a child, dust-covered, breathless. He knelt at Philip's feet, eyes to the ground. "My king, a message." Philip took the scroll but did not unroll it. The seal was from Pella. He already knew. In that moment, he had conquered the Illyrians, but something greater had been born. He looked westward, toward the home he had rebuilt from ash, toward the walls behind which, even now, a child was being wrapped in cloth. The scroll broke in his hand. He read the words and smiled. Not the smile of a man who had won, but the smile of a man who had been replaced. That night, Macedon did not celebrate. No parades, no songs. The soldiers were too tired to sing, the king too thoughtful to speak. But in the great hall, fires burned low, and quiet footsteps moved through the colonnades. A servant carried a bundle wrapped in linen and placed it gently into a carved wooden cradle. Olympias stood beside it, one hand resting on the rim. Philip entered the room alone. He said nothing. She said less. They both looked down. The child lay still, awake. His eyes, too focused for an infant, stared upward at the flickering ceiling. Not in confusion, but in study. Philip bent low. He touched the boy's brow, and in a voice just above breath, he said, "Your name will be remembered long after mine is dust." He turned and left. Olympias remained. She leaned over the cradle and whispered, "You are not of dust, my son. You are of flame." And thus ended the first chapter in the Tale of Kings. One king reborn through battle, another through blood. The land did not know it yet, nor did the world, but a shadow had begun to stretch across the earth, and in its heart, a name: Alexander.